If you know someone who would love a peek behind the galley curtain and find out what crew really get up to, please make sure to share the Red Eye podcast. Whether you're flying as a passenger or working the cabin, I think we can all agree on one thing. We just want the flight to go smoothly. A clean takeoff, no turbulence, a soft landing, ideally a few minutes ahead of schedule. A couple of empty seats wouldn't hurt, the loo's not too grim, something halfway decent to eat, and absolutely no dramas from gate to gate. But let's be honest, if every flight was that straightforward, the Red Eye podcast wouldn't have much to talk about, would it? Today's story was sent in by a crew member still fresh into his flying career, and yet, on one long-haul flight, he found himself handling not one, but two separate emergencies back-to-back. He played it down, told us it was just a string of unfortunate events, but what we heard was something else entirely. Someone who stepped up. Someone who took charge with the kind of calm and clarity you'd expect from someone with years under their belt. We already know that the crew are brilliant, but every now and then, someone just smashes through the mould. And in our opinion, this one absolutely did. Doors to armed and cross-check.
Come fly the Red Eye!
Welcome aboard the Red Eye. Middle East to Austin, Texas, circa 2017. Harky threw her head back and laughed as Amit tried to copy her movements. No, like this, she said, lifting one leg and spinning on the other, all while rotating her hips and circling her hand. I will get it, Amit said, determined, trying again. He so badly wanted to have this line dancing nailed before they got to Texas. Then all he had to do was buy a hat at the airport and he would be ready to cowboy. Nearly. You're getting there, Harky said encouragingly. They were the only two crew on duty in economy. The others had gone down to rest, and they'd really hit it off. Amit had no doubt that their layover was going to be wild, and from the briefing, the whole crew had been excited for it. Tonight, they were heading straight out to go line dancing, and tomorrow they were visiting a ranch. Austin, Texas was a world away from anything he'd seen yet, and he wasn't going to waste a minute of it. Right, I'll go get the sandwiches, Amit said, circling his hand and scooting his feet across the galley floor towards the aisle, just as a passenger appeared on the right-hand side and witnessed his moves. Can I get a coffee? He asked politely, a glint of amusement in his eye. Certainly, sir, said Harky, still laughing. Amit grinned and saluted as he left the galley. He was fairly new to flying, but he absolutely loved being crew. He liked the sharp suit the airline issued him, and the way heads turned when he and his colleagues walked through the airport in step, looking like they meant business. He liked the way his family back home never held back in telling him how proud they were, and he earned a decent wage, enough to live well, save a little, and enjoy the kind of life he'd once only imagined. Living away from home had had its challenges, of course, but it was fun too, exciting even. Everything felt new and full of possibility. Compared to what he'd known growing up in India, this life felt like a different world entirely, and he was determined to make the most of it, to enjoy every flight and every layover. But for Amit, it wasn't just about the uniform, or the pay, or even the passport stamps. What he loved most was the job itself, taking people where they needed to go, being part of their stories, even just for a moment, and most of all, keeping them safe. Because that was what he was most proud of, that he and his fellow crew were keeping people safe, looking after them whether they appreciated it or not, constantly on alert in case something needed attending to, constantly checking things and dealing with whatever was thrown at him. He had learned so much in training, and now he really felt like he'd found his purpose in life. Even now, in the middle of the night, on this 14-hour sector. In the cabin, most people were sleeping. They were on a Boeing 777-200, an old workhorse of a plane that was probably once crew-friendly, but these days, as the airlines crammed in more and more seats, it was more of an obstacle course. Amit flicked his torch from side to side as he made his way to the sandwich cart near the L3 door. Limbs were flopping out into the aisle as far as he could see. Legs, elbows, the occasional stray foot poking out from a blanket. He sighed. He'd get back to the aft galley somehow. He always did. At the door, he switched on the overhead work light above the galley area and released the brake on the cart. Just as he reached for the handle, something shifted in the corner of his eye, and his heart jolted. A woman stood there, silently, just inches from him, half-shadowed in the narrow strip of light. Amit instinctively put a hand to his chest and gave a nervous laugh. "Oh, madam, you gave me a fright." She didn't respond. She just stared at him in the dim light. He managed a polite smile, pulled the cart out and flicked the light off again. The woman vanished back into the dark, like she'd never been there. Trying to steady his breath, Amit began the slow journey down the aisle, nudging stray limbs out of the way with the toe of his shoe. He kept his torch low, guiding the wheels around feet and bags, the occasional dropped headphone. Just as he reached the soft glow of the aft galley, a sudden thud behind him made him stop. He turned, seeing nothing but still shadows. Then a call bell chimed on. Harky was sipping tea and chatting with the same passenger as Amit rolled the cart towards her. "Would you mind storing this for me, please?" She nodded and took it from him, barely missing a beat in her conversation as he walked quickly back up the aisle. Back at the door, the dim glow from the overhead call light and his torch beam gave just enough illumination for Amit to see the shape on the floor. He reached up and flicked the galley work light back on. "She just passed out," said the man standing nearby, the one who'd pressed the call bell. Amit nodded absently, already kneeling beside her. The woman had collapsed awkwardly in the narrow aisle, her arms twisted unnaturally behind her large frame, crumpled face down against the cabin floor. She wore a brightly patterned African dress, the fabric bunched and fanned beneath her like a curtain caught in a breeze. He took a moment to steady himself, his eyes scanning and his mind working. He needed to elevate her legs, maybe give her oxygen, and he definitely needed to check her vitals. But before all that, he had to move her, and she was easily twice his size. He rolled up his sleeves and crouched lower beside her head. Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, hoping she would respond and aid herself. He spoke gently but firmly, his mouth close to her ear, but there was no response. No groan, no flutter of the eyelids. He reached out and turned her head carefully to the side, needing to see her face, and froze. White foam had gathered at the corners of her mouth, a slick froth now pooling slightly on the floor beneath her cheek. Amit leaned in, his eyes narrowed, trying to detect the subtle rise and fall of her chest. There was nothing. He reached for her wrist and pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point. Nothing. If she'd fainted, there should have been something. A thready pulse, a slow breath, but this, he realized with a shudder, this was stillness. Cold, unmistakable stillness. Amit pushed himself up on one leg and reached for the phone to call the back galley. He watched as the pink light illuminated above the door there and waited. But no one picked up. He looked up the aisle in the other direction in the hope of seeing someone there, but there was no one. He called Harky's name as loud as he could, waking everyone around, but she didn't hear him. Amit was just a rookie, only 6 months into his flying career, and yet here he was, all alone in this situation. And for just a second he felt a feeling of panic starting to bubble up inside of him. But it was just a second. And then he quashed it and squared his shoulders. He was trained, and, as he looked down once more at the lifeless body on the floor, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Amit pushed the PA button and firmed his voice.
"Cabin crew, medical assistance needed at L3,
he said twice. "You two," he said to the men by the exit who were now stood up. "Help me move her." Within just a few minutes, the L3 door area was a mile-high emergency room. With the manager on call to Medlink on the ground, the defibrillator attached and monitoring their patient, and the medical kit spilling its contents onto the floor. The decision to divert came quickly, but with tanks full of fuel, it would take some time before they could land. Amit looked up as he finished his umpteenth round of compressions, silently willing the defib to advise a shock. Anything so that he could have a breather, take a break. Despite the presence of 2 doctors who had come forward and offered help, it was airline policy that only crew did CPR. And so Amit, as the first to know and best to deal with guy, was now on his knees, dripping with sweat, pushing down with all the strength he had left, trying to drive each compression deep enough to matter. Haki, beside him on breaths, sat up to reset the mask, and without hesitation, Amit leaned straight back in, arms trembling, muscles screaming. His shoulders burned, his elbows ached. He focused on the rhythm, counted under his breath. Just keep going. Then, suddenly, there was a gasp, and everyone froze. Then another. Huge, rattling breaths like someone surfacing from deep water. Amit leaned back on his heels, his own breath caught in his throat. Around him, the 3 other crew shared quick, wide-eyed glances, half disbelief and half prayer. The woman's eyelids fluttered open, and for one glorious second, they all believed she was coming back to them. Then her eyes rolled back into her skull, her entire body tensed, and then it began to buck violently against the floor. She was having a seizure. Amit was moving before the word fully formed in his mind, grabbing blankets and pillows, anything soft that he could reach. He crouched by her head, cushioning what he could, watching the clock, timing the episode like they'd practiced. Around him, the cabin blurred, and all he saw was her. Then, just as quickly, the seizing stopped. And so did her heart. Again. It was a cruel cycle as the crew worked to save her. Amit drilled compressions until he could no longer feel his arms, swapping with Haki occasionally, but she wasn't strong like him and didn't have his stamina, and so he pushed through every barrier and threshold that his body hit. Their only break was when she was convulsing, and then, with quivering muscles, they padded around her and kept her safe from further harm. It was their job. It was what they needed to do for an entire hour until the plane had dumped enough fuel to land at the nearest airport and the paramedics took over. In his jumpsuit, Amit let the paramedic check him over. Never in his life had he pushed his body so hard, and it was only now, as he struggled to raise the cup of electrolyte-spiked water to his mouth, was the ringing in his ears subsiding. The beat of his blood pulsing, quietening to a dull thrum. "You good to go?" he said, standing to his feet. The flight manager looked down at Amit with concern on his face. "Are you okay for the rest of the flight?" he asked kindly. "I can stand you down if you'd like." Amit shook his head and gave him a grateful smile. "No, I'll be good," he said. He could feel the crash of post-adrenaline fatigue, but under it there was a warm glow of relief. The lady had survived. A stroke, they said, that had caused her to stop breathing and then brought on the fits, but they'd stabilised her, and most importantly, she was still alive. Who was he to feel sorry for himself and take the rest of the flight off while his colleagues picked up the slack? He pushed himself up on his feet. "Ready to go again, boss," he said with a grin. He'd always wanted to see Texas, and he was ready to get back on their way. When everything was done, when they had removed the lady's bags and security checked her area, when the plane was refueled and a new flight plan had been submitted, they pushed back from the gate and rolled towards the runway, minus one passenger. At the R3 door, Amit gazed out of his window as the events of the last few hours sorted themselves into some sort of order in his mind. Before he knew it, they were speeding along the runway, and he looked down as they left the tarmac and the lights of the airport grew further and further away. Below them, his lady was getting the best care she could hope for, and he said a silent prayer for her recovery. The passengers were quiet once again, and between here and the breakfast service, the crew would have little else to do than take crew rest. And he was ready for it. Ready to rest his aching body for just a few short hours, so that when they got there, he was ready to hit the ground running. He gazed along the wing, watching as the flaps moved, following the lines of rivets or whatever they were that held it all together. And then he saw it. At first, he thought it was just something he'd never noticed before. Something that wasn't out of the usual, but as he pressed his forehead against the window to get a closer look, his stomach sunk. Along the wing, near to the end, a liquid was cascading out of somewhere, and even with his limited knowledge of how planes worked, Amit was 100% sure that it was fuel. He looked across the aisle to where Haki was also looking out of her window, but he could tell by her relaxed posture that she hadn't seen anything like he had. He knew that he had to tell the pilots, but there were rules. Ones about the sterile flight deck and not calling them at this crucial time. Other times he should go through the manager. But what about this time? This exact situation? What should he do right now? For the second time that day, Amit pushed aside his second thoughts and did exactly what he thought he should do. He picked up the phone and called the flight deck.
Hello?
The pilot sounded confused as he answered the call, no doubt surprised at the interruption. "Captain," Amit said quickly, "there is fuel leaking from the right-hand wing." There was a short pause.
Oh, are you sure?
"Yes, sir, I am certain," Amit said. "I am watching it now." Outside, a silvery stream of fuel drifted down into the night. At this rate, Amit thought with suppressed horror, they'd soon be running dry.
Thank you for letting us know.
The phone went dead as the pilot hung up. Amit imagined them checking their gauges, confirming what he'd told them and making their plans. It seems like an age, but was just a minute or two before the PA crackled into life, telling him what he'd told them was right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that we need to go back to where we have come from, as our instruments are telling us that something is not quite right with the aircraft. Hopefully, we won't be on the ground for long, and we will be on our way once again. Please accept our apologies for the inconvenience.
Amit ignored the loud sighs and stares from the passengers around him. He knew they were pissed, and he didn't blame them, although none of it could be helped. No, his mind was stuck on the captain's words. "Our instruments are telling us," he had said, with no mention of the vigilant crew member who had called them. How long would it have been before they'd noticed? Would it have been too late? Amit considered it, but deep down he knew that an alarm would have alerted them before long. Even so, he thought, giving himself some credit even if they didn't, he still felt proud of himself for making the call, for trusting his gut. Perhaps he was even the instrument they were referring to, he thought. And if so, he wasn't quite sure how he felt about that. Much like the paramedics had carefully walked them through the passengers' vital signs just an hour ago, this time the engineer had unpacked his latest twist over a cup of coffee in the galley. Apparently, he told them, that whilst they had jettisoned fuel on the first diversion, a spring-loaded dump valve was opened, but it didn't close again as it should have. It should have snapped shut, but as they all knew too well by now, it hadn't. And so here they were again, stretching their hours to the last possible second as the plane took off once again into the night. "6 hours late, their wheels touched down in Austin. Their early evening arrival had become an early hour of the morning, and Amit and his crew couldn't help but feel disappointed that they'd missed their first night out. At the hotel, the night manager met them in the lobby and offered her sympathy. "I hear you all had a few troubles getting here," she said, as they each signed for their keys. "Oh, just a few," said the manager with a dry smile. "Well, we've kept the bar open for y'all, and we've got some country music playing, so why don't y'all head up to the roof and let your hair down now that you're here? Drinks are on us." She said it so cheerily, as if it was no big deal, just part of the Texas hospitality. But her words were like a fanfare to their ears. The best thing they'd heard all day. Amit exchanged looks with his colleagues, a grin forming on all of their faces as they forgot their fatigue. He felt a tingle in his feet as they warmed up, ready for dancing, and he ran through the moves in his head. It had been a long day, that was certain, and it had come with some challenges. But they were behind them now. And there was one thing that he really loved about crew. They never let a bad day get in the way of a good night. Yeehaw! Bloody hell, Kaylee. You don't half love writing me stuff like that today, don't you?
The Red Eye podcast is written by Kaylee Kay, narrated and produced by me, Ali Murphy. These stories are based on true events, but certain details, characters, and timelines have been altered to protect the innocent. Visit our website, theredeyepod.com, to subscribe to our newsletter and to find out details on how you can contribute your story for us to turn into an episode.
Our author, Kaylee Kay, does an incredible job of taking these true stories and turning them into fun little episodes for the Red Eye podcast. But did you know she's already written 6 novels, and they are amazing? So if you want to read those, visit Amazon and search for Kaylee Kay, and I'll put a link in the show notes too.